And the one question the media should have asked at the press conference is, Secretary Bessent, can you name one case since World War I, over the last 100+ years, just one case that fits your model? All we need is one, sir, one case. And you know what? There's not a case. And this is something that's important because there's a second point I want to make, which is you also see the targets lashing back. It's the sanctions we slapped on Japan that led to the Pearl Harbor attack.
Right.
This is not a controversial point at this point. This is well known. And we run the risk that if we go forward, what's going to happen is Iran will lash back, then we're going to spiral back, and that is the escalation trap. These are not off-ramps to war. They're effectively the Western way of war.
刚才这段精彩集锦，某些人的说法听起来相当热闹，制裁会导致战争，关税就是封锁，连中国的反应都被包装成美国政策失算的证据，仿佛只要把责任推给别人，再摆出一副看透历史的姿态，所有问题就都解释清楚了。可问题是，国际关系不是脱口秀，也不是谁声音大谁就掌握真相。大家好，这里是华人视角频道，今天我们就来拆解这场访谈，看看这位教授究竟拿出了哪些历史案例，又是如何把复杂的地缘政治串成一条看似完整的因果链。从经济制裁是否真的有效，到中国可能采取的反制措施，从稀土供应牵动美国制造业，到美国在亚洲收缩军事部署后，南韩是否会重新考虑核武道路，节目里的每一个判断都指向同一个问题：当威胁代替谈判，当升级被包装成降温，最后被推向风险边缘的究竟是谁？接下来我们还会看到伊朗如何利用能源和金融压力影响美国政治，以及中东和亚洲正在形成的全新力量格局。别急着接受任何一方的结论，正片里我们逐条看证据。
Joining us now is a great friend of the show, Professor Robert Pape of the University of Chicago, a great friend of our show. It's great to see you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's so great to be with you this morning.
Absolutely. So, sir, we know we're going to talk about South Korea, but we also know that an extensive part of your work is around economic sanctions. We just did an entire segment about China's expected response. We could put C1 up here on the screen so you could give a little bit more of your analysis. China is saying that they will hit out at, quote, illegal new U.S. sanctions on Iran and its trading partners. Considering your expertise and your decades-long research into the subject, what do you make of the Secretary Bessent's economic D-Day threats here against Iran and its trading partners?
Yes, what Scott Bessent is doing is going through another route of the escalation trap. He's presenting it as an alternative to war, but that's not what it is. What it's really going to lead to is another escalation trap. And if anything, if he in fact goes forward, it would be more military war. So for 30 years, I have studied, as we all know, air power, but also side by side with that, economic blockades and economic sanctions, publishing big articles, fat appendices, all the cases since World War I. And here's what people need to know, that starting in World War I, the pattern is different before, but starting in World War I, economic blockades and economic sanctions have never on their own won a major war. They've never toppled a government on their own, in a major war, and they have never led to capitulation of that government to the coercer's demands. This is extremely important to know because in World War I, there was massive British blockade on Germany. World War II, massive economic sanctions and U.S. blockade on Japan. And in both those cases, that blockade did not stop a messy ground wars. In fact, they only ended with messy ground wars, and with Japan, the atomic bombs. If we look at Saddam Hussein in the 1990s, we imposed economic sanctions on Saddam Hussein after we kicked his forces out of Kuwait, and those stayed on for a dozen years. They dropped the economy's GDP by 48% each year for 12 solid years, and did not stop us from having to invade with 150,000 ground forces. Iran, we've been slapping sanctions on Iran for decades, no result. And also Putin. Look at what happened with Russia after he invaded Ukraine. Now, what has been we slapped economic sanctions on Russia. What has been the result in all of these cases? All of these cases, notice, they don't lead to peace. They don't lead to ceasefire. They lead to failure, strategic failure, and more war, more escalation. So Scott Bessent is really not doing a good service to the world by saying that this is an off-ramp to escalation. And the one question the media should have asked at the press conference is, Secretary Bessent, can you name one case since World War I, over the last 100+ years, just one case that fits your model? All we need is one, sir, one case. And you know what? There's not a case. And this is something that's important, because there's a second point I want to make, which is you also see the targets lashing back. It's the sanctions we slapped on Japan that led to the Pearl Harbor attack.
Right.
This is not a controversial point at this point. This is well known. And we run the risk that if we go forward, what's going to happen is Iran will lash back, then we're going to spiral back, and that is the escalation trap. These are not off-ramps to war. They're effectively the Western way of war, because they persuade liberal audiences, done everything you could do, so force is a last resort. That's how you get the liberals on board for wars they don't want to fight.
And what examples throughout history do we have of a country as powerful as China being sanctioned? And what are the implications for the U.S. ability to carry through its threats?
Well, we don't have to look that far back. Just go back a year, because what the tariffs were on China were effectively economic sanctions. So President Trump used the word tariffs, but if you peel the onion and you look under the hood, they're exactly the trade cutoffs of sanctions. So they're really not much different than sanctions at all. In fact, they're identical. And what happened? China responded with cutting off rare earths. And that may sound a little inside baseball to most people, but it's important to know that these things we call rare earths are not just dirt, but they show up in all the chips that we put in our cars. I drive a RAV4. You can't produce RAV4s here in Ohio or in the Midwest, in the American plants, if China cuts off those rare earths. So this has much more dramatic consequences. And I'm not at all surprised that, and what I've been saying China would do is they're just going to bluff it off. They're going to ignore this. Now, if Scott Bessent goes forward and truly cuts off China's banks, then I think China's going to respond. But I don't think China sees this as a real threat yet to it. I think it's too much bluster here, and that's why Scott Bessent wouldn't even mention the word China at his press. Notice he didn't even say the word China. And he said, and somebody asked him, why aren't you being tough? And he said, well, I don't want to blow up the world financial system. He literally said those words. So think about it. Here we've got the Secretary of the Treasury rolling out a plan, and he says, oh, and by the way, if I execute the plan, we all go down with it. I don't understand. That's not a plan for victory in my book. Maybe you can help me understand this Washington. This must be what happens in Washington.
No, this is more from a standard episode of Veep, unfortunately. Professor, we also wanted to ask you about South Korea, and just generally in the broader context of what's happening in Asia. We can put D1 up here on the screen. Some pretty shocking new public polling actually coming out of South Korea. For the first time in modern history, really, you see that the opinion of the United States among South Koreans is near an all-time low in 2026. Much of it on the heels now of Trump canceling these military exercises with the South, trying to court the DPRK in the North, but also with a lot of our trade relationships and blustering against South Korea, on top of many of the other incendiary actions taken against their companies here in our nation. I know that you have previously have given some analysis about when the United States seeks to potentially abandon South Korea, that they can pursue a nuclear weapons program. How do you put it in the broader context of the realignment of U.S. position of power in Asia?
Yes, and I've also been to the Seoul dialogues. I've actually been to South Korea with the president and so forth on the stage. So I know a little bit about these subjects, and it's part of what I study. So what you are seeing in that chart, it's very interesting. The actual point where it starts to spike up is in 2025. And what happened in 2025? Trump's tariffs, which I told you were sanctions. So he tariffed South Korea as well. And this has an enormous impact on the South Korean economy. And yes, he pulled back a bit from this, but there's still these pretty serious tariffs there. And by the way, South Korea is really feeling the pain from this. So it's no surprise at all that this is where the spike is. And then in the war, during the Iran war, now President Trump is asking for South Korea to essentially give us some of their destroyers to put at risk, because we won't put our destroyers at risk. No. We're going to fight to the last South Korean destroyer. So notice this is not working out very well, and the South Korean public is able to follow this. Now, the bigger picture, though, is what you see is that we are in a quagmire in the Middle East, and we're now pulling our aircraft carrier from Asia that's supposed to be protecting South Korea into this quagmire, and there's no replacement to go back to Asia. So what you really have to worry about as time goes on is not just this short-term kerfuffle, but South Korea sees there's no more protection from Big Brother Uncle Sam. And what does that mean? The last time they worried about that, they went for nuclear weapons in the 1970s. And it was only when we absolutely guaranteed and had that our ground forces would be there, et cetera, and actually stationed in South Korea, that they turned off the nuclear program. So this is not a small issue. It's not, it may be a bit under the media radar right now.
It is.
But this could be the first nuclear domino to fall outside of the Middle East. We've seen Iran, Saudi Arabia, now South Korea.
Well, so racing for nuclear weapons is one way of trying to create some stability. Another is to actually just reach a peaceful coexistence with your neighbor. Is there a prospect for that in the region? Like, could you imagine a world in which the U.S. kind of withdraws its presence? I mean, clearly they're already withdrawing their military capacity there, and that forces the parties there to say, you know what, we're not going anywhere. Like, we need to reach some sort of mutual agreement here by which we can live together peacefully.
I do think that's possible. So from 2012 to 15, one of the reasons I went to South Korea is I made 8 trips to China, South Korea, and Taiwan in that 3-year period. And I was meeting with high-level people, including at the level of the president here, especially the office.
这期节目围绕一个看似熟悉，实际上极其危险的问题展开：经济制裁究竟是避免战争的替代方案，还是战争升级之前的另一种形式？节目中，芝加哥大学佩普教授通过长期历史研究指出，从第1次世界大战以来，经济封锁和经济制裁几乎从来没有单靠自身力量赢得一场重大战争，也很少真正迫使一个政府彻底投降，接受施压方提出的全部要求。他们或许能够制造压力，削弱对手的经济活力，但压力并不等于服从，经济困难也不必然自动转化为政治崩溃。相反，当一个国家感到自身生存受到威胁时，制裁往往会强化其对抗意志，并促使它寻找新的反制手段。这就是本期内容最值得我们警惕的地方。政策制定者常常把制裁包装成战争之外的选择，好像只要不直接出动军队，就仍然属于和平手段。但从实际效果来看，制裁同样可能切断贸易，冻结金融渠道，打击能源供应，并把普通民众、企业和整个社会卷入对抗之中。一旦制裁对象开始反击，施压方又进一步追加措施，双方就会进入一种不断加码的循环。原本被称为降温工具的政策，最终可能变成通往军事冲突的阶梯。节目中提到日本遭受制裁后发动珍珠港袭击的历史案例，也提到伊朗和俄罗斯在长期制裁下的处境。 这里的关键并不是说每一个历史事件都能被简单归结为某一项政策，更不是说制裁一定毫无作用，而是提醒我们，任何政策都必须放在完整的因果链条中观察。制裁会带来怎样的反应？对方有没有退让的空间？施压方是否准备好承受反制的代价？有没有明确的谈判出口？如果这些问题都没有答案，那么所谓的战略计划很可能只剩下口号和威胁。尤其当制裁涉及全球金融体系时，风险就不再局限于某一个国家。美国如果切断中国银行的金融渠道，中国也不会只是被动等待。节目提到，关税在实际效果上可能与制裁式贸易封锁相近，而中国曾通过限制稀土供应进行回应。稀土并不是普通意义上的泥土，它关系到汽车、晶片、军工设备以及大量现代工业产品的生产。一条供应链被切断，影响的就不只是外交关系，而可能迅速传导到工厂、就业、物价和金融市场。所谓打击对手，最后也可能变成对自身经济体系的反噬。这也解释了为什么在重大国际议题上，语言本身同样值得关注。当一位财政部长一方面提出强硬的经济方案，另一方面又承认执行方案可能摧毁全球金融体系，那么公众有理由追问，这究竟是一套可以实现目标的政策，还是一种用来制造威慑的政治表演？威胁如果没有可信的执行能力，就可能沦为虚张声势，而虚张声势一旦被对手识破，施压方为了维护信誉，反而可能被迫采取更加激烈的行动。真正危险的往往不是一开始的狠话，而是狠话之后无法后退的处境。节目随后把视线转向南韩，民调变化所反映的并不只是某一项关税政策的不满，也不只是某次军事演习的取消，而是盟友对安全承诺是否可靠的整体判断。一个国家是否愿意长期依赖另一个国家的保护，取决于他能否相信对方会在关键时刻承担风险。如果南韩发现美国把军事资源从亚洲调往中东，同时要求南韩拿出自己的军舰承担风险，却不愿让美国军舰处于同样危险之中，那么这种不对称感受就会不断累积。安全关系最怕的不是公开争论，而是不确定性。过去明确的驻军安排和安全保证曾经让南韩放弃核武计划，但如果这些保证逐渐模糊，南韩就可能重新思考自身的安全选择。节目提到，核武扩散可能成为中东以外新的连锁反应，这个判断是否会完全实现，仍然需要事实和实践来验证，但他提出的逻辑非常清楚。当一个国家不再相信外部保护，他就会寻找自己的保险方案，而核武器正是代价最高、后果也最难逆转的保险。从更大的亚洲和中东格局来看，地区国家正在重新评估权力分布。伊朗被节目描述为正在成为新的重要权力中心，沙特阿拉伯、土耳其、巴基斯坦以及其他国家都可能根据自身利益重新安排安全合作。这里的变化说明，国际秩序并不是由某一个国家单方面宣布就能决定的。一个大国撤出某个地区，并不意味着那里会自动恢复和平。相反，留下的力量真空可能促使各方结盟、扩军，甚至考虑发展核武。真正的稳定不是让所有国家都害怕同一个强者，而是让各方相信，即使存在分歧，也仍然有谈判、合作与共存的空间。因此，节目最后提出了一个值得认真思考的方向：解决地区冲突，不能只依赖政府之间的高压对抗，也可以从学者、智库和公民社会之间的持续交流开始。这样的沟通未必能立刻带来协议，却能够建立最低限度的理解，减少误判，创造未来谈判的可能。外交并不总是轰轰烈烈的公开声明，很多时候它恰恰是在没有摄像机的房间里，通过反复接触和有限互信，慢慢避免最坏结果。本期内容还提醒我们，战争并不总是突然爆发，它可能从一项关税开始，从一次金融制裁开始，从一句不能收回的强硬表态开始，也可能从盟友之间逐渐消失的信任开始。每一次升级，单独看似乎都有理由，但当这些行动彼此叠加，整个系统就可能滑向没有人真正希望看到的方向。面对复杂的国际局势，我们既不能只相信政府的宣传，也不能把所有问题简化成谁绝对正确，谁绝对邪恶。更重要的是，追问政策能否实现目标，代价由谁承担，反制会如何发生。 以及有没有真正的退出机制，因为真正负责任的战略不只是展示力量，更是知道什么时候应该停下来，如何给对手保留台阶，又如何给自己保留选择。这期节目的核心启示也许可以归纳为一句话：没有谈判出口的制裁往往不是和平方案，而是延迟发生的冲突。希望今天的内容能帮助大家从历史、经济和安全3个角度重新理解正在变化的世界。你认为经济制裁更可能迫使对手让步，还是会把双方推入升级陷阱？南韩以及其他盟友的安全焦虑又会不会进一步改变亚洲的核扩散格局？欢迎在评论区留下你的看法，也欢迎点赞订阅观看更多精彩视频。